I still remember the moment my world began to unravel. It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary in every way, until my phone rang. Mrs. Aldridge. The voice on the other end said polite but unnervingly serious. This is First National Bank. We're calling about your loan payment. Your account is 3 months overdue and we need to discuss repayment options immediately. At first I thought it had to be a mistake. Loan. What loan? I hadn't borrowed a penny in decades. My mortgage was paid off years ago and I prided myself on living debt-free. There must be some misunderstanding, I said, forcing a laugh to cover the unease creeping up my spine. I don't have any loan with your bank. The representative hesitated. Ma'am, you're listed as the primary borrower. It's a $280,000 personal loan taken out last year. Your signature is on all the paperwork. My hand began to tremble. That's impossible. I never signed anything. But then he said something that made my stomach drop. Mrs. Aldridge, we have copies of your driver's license, your social security number, and your signature. Unless you can prove fraud, you're legally responsible for repayment. The rest of his words blurred together. Late fees, court proceedings, asset seizure. I barely heard him. My ears were ringing, my heart pounding so loudly I could hardly think. When the call ended, I sat frozen in my chair, the phone slipping from my grasp onto the table. Who could have done this? Who even had my information? And then, like a flash of lightning, one face came to mind. David, my son-in-law. He had been part of our family for nearly 10 years. Charming, attentive, and always ready to lend a hand, he had everyone fooled. Even me, especially me. There had been times when he'd asked me little questions about my finances. How do you manage your bills online, Mom? Or could you show me how you set up autopay? I want to help make things easier for you. I thought nothing of it. I believed him when he said he just wanted to help me with tech stuff. And then there were the times he'd asked me to sign forms on behalf of the family, saying it was just a routine thing for taxes or some minor legal paperwork. I barely looked at the details. After all, this was David, my son's husband, someone I trusted. My stomach churned as the pieces clicked into place. The access to my information, the casual questions, the papers I signed without reading carefully. I had handed him the keys to my life, and he had used them to destroy me. I wanted to scream, to call him right that second and demand answers. But something deep inside me, the quiet, disciplined voice that had seen me through a lifetime of challenges, told me to wait. I needed to think. The first thing I did was pull out my old filing cabinet. I found every scrap of paperwork I could, bank statements, tax records, even those so-called routine forms David had once asked me to sign. My hands trembled as I looked for his handwriting, his fingerprints in my life. By the time evening came, my head was pounding. My son Thomas stopped by with David for dinner. David waltzed into my house like he always did. Confident, charismatic, smiling as if he owned the world. Hey, Mom, he said cheerfully, kissing my cheek. How's my favorite mother-in-law? The words made bile rise in my throat. I smiled weakly, masking my turmoil. I'm fine, David. Just a little tired today. Don't overdo it, he said, patting my shoulder. You've earned your rest. We'll always take care of you. His words felt like poison now. I studied his face that night. How effortlessly he charmed everyone at the table. How Thomas beamed at him like he was the perfect husband. And I thought to myself, no one here knows who you really are. But I will make sure they find out. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I knew my life had just split into 2 parts. Before the call and after. From this moment on, I would not be the trusting, naive mother-in-law David thought I was. I wasn't going to scream or beg. I was going to quietly, methodically dismantle the life he had built on my back. And when it was over, he would never see it coming. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's smiling face, that perfectly polished charm hiding a deceitful heart. I kept replaying our years together as a family. He had seemed like the perfect son-in-law, handsome, hardworking, always the first to raise a glass at holidays and make everyone laugh. My friends even used to envy me. You're so lucky, Marion, they'd say. Thomas really found a gem. You couldn't have asked for a better son-in-law. And I had believed them. I believed every word David said, Every compliment, every reassuring gesture. He called me mom from the very beginning. He fixed little things around the house, brought me flowers on my birthday, even helped me set up my online banking when I said I found it confusing. That day still haunted me, the day I'd given him access to my computer so he could show me how to make bill payments easier. He sat right next to me at the kitchen table, smiling kindly as he typed things in. Technology can be tricky, he'd said. Let me set everything up for you. You can trust me, Mom. I had nodded, grateful for his help. How could I have been so foolish? The next morning, I sat with my coffee staring blankly at the mug as if it held answers. I knew I had to act fast, but I also knew I couldn't let David suspect anything. I decided my first step would be to visit the bank. When I walked in clutching my handbag like a lifeline, I felt my legs trembling. The young bank officer greeted me politely, asked me to sit, and pulled up my file on the computer. When he slid the loan documents across the desk toward me, my breath caught in my throat. There. It was. My name. My social security number. My address. And my signature. Only it wasn't my signature. Not exactly. It was close, terrifyingly close, but certain letters were off. My G in Aldridge always had a flourish at the end. On this paper it was plain. He forged this, I whispered. The bank officer shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, unless you can provide evidence of forgery, the loan is legally yours. We'll need a police report, handwriting analysis, and a lawyer's statement to move forward. I felt my chest tighten. So until then, you'll come after me for payment. He nodded, sympathetic but firm. I left the bank with a folder full of papers and a heart that felt like lead. That evening, Thomas and David came by again. David was as cheerful as ever, chatting about work, talking about their upcoming vacation. He even mentioned how expensive life was these days. You know, he said casually, sometimes you just have to take out a loan to make things happen. No shame in it. It's just the way the world works now. I froze. My fork hung midair. Was he testing me? I forced a smile. I suppose so. But I've always believed in living within my means. He smirked. Well, not everyone can be as careful as you, Mom. My stomach twisted. He was daring me to react. But I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. That night after they left, I opened my old filing cabinet again. I found every document David had ever touched: insurance forms, joint signatures for small family matters, even the power of attorney I'd once given Thomas in case of emergency. It terrified me how much trust I had placed in my family, never thinking it could be used against me. I knew now that I needed professional help. The next morning, I called an attorney I had known years ago, a former parent of one of my students. Her name was Lisa, and she was one of the sharpest legal minds I had ever met. When I told her what happened, she didn't sound surprised. Elder financial abuse is more common than people think, she said. You did the right thing coming to me. We'll get proof. But Marion, don't let him know you suspect a thing. Her words settled into me like steel. I wasn't going to confront David. Not yet. I would smile, play the role of the trusting mother-in-law just a little longer. Because soon, very soon, I would tear down the facade he had built. And I would enjoy watching his world collapse. The following days were some of the longest of my life. Every interaction with David felt like I was walking on a tightrope, pretending to be oblivious while quietly gathering the pieces of the puzzle he thought I'd never find. Lisa, my lawyer, wasted no time. She arranged for a handwriting expert to analyze the signatures on the loan documents compared to my real handwriting samples. We also began digging into the bank records tied to the loan. That's when we started uncovering the smaller, overlooked details. The email address linked to the account wasn't mine. The phone number listed wasn't mine either, though it looked eerily similar to David's old work phone. Piece by piece, David's scheme was unraveling. But in the meantime, life went on as usual, or at least I had to make it look that way. David kept visiting, acting as if nothing had happened. He'd fix the leaky faucet, offer to run errands for me, even joke about how much he looked out for me like his own mother. It made my stomach turn. But I smiled, nodded, and thanked him because Lisa's words echoed in my head. Don't let him suspect a thing. If he thinks you're onto him, he'll cover his tracks. One afternoon, I invited Thomas and David for tea, just like old times. I watched David as he poured himself a cup, his movements so casual, so confident, as though the world would always bend to his will. He glanced at me with that charming smile. "Mom, you're awfully quiet today. Everything okay?" I returned his smile. "Oh, just tired. I've been sorting through old papers. You know how cluttered I can get." He chuckled. "Need any help?" "No, no. I've got it handled." He didn't know that among those papers were copies of every document he'd ever asked me to sign. Proof of his access to my personal information. Proof of how I'd trusted him again and again. And soon proof that would destroy him. Later that evening, Lisa called with news that sent a chill through me. Marion, the handwriting analyst, confirmed it. "Those signatures on the loan documents aren't yours? The differences are subtle, but they're enough to prove forgery." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by anger. Lisa continued, "We also traced the bank transfers. The loan money went into an account jointly owned by David and someone named Stephanie Miller." I felt my knees weaken. Who is she? Judging by the spending, she's not his business partner. Expensive dinners, jewelry, hotel stays. "Marion, I'm afraid your son-in-law has been using your money to fund an affair." My chest tightened. Betrayal layered on top of betrayal. That night, I sat in my bedroom staring at the documents spread across my bed. David had not only stolen from me, he had humiliated me. The son-in-law I had welcomed into my family with open arms, the man I defended when friends made cynical jokes about in-laws, he had seen me as nothing more than a means to an end. For the first time in days, I let myself cry. Not out of weakness, but out of grief. Grief for the years I'd wasted trusting him, for the bond I thought we had as a family, for the son who would soon have to face the truth about his husband. But as the tears fell, something inside me hardened. I wouldn't be David's victim anymore. Lisa and I began planning the next steps. We would file charges for forgery and fraud, and we would make sure the bank knew I was not responsible for the debt. And then, when the time was right, I would look David in the eye and let him know that the game was over, but not yet. For now, I would keep smiling, because David had no idea the storm I was about to unleash. A week later, I returned to the bank, this time with Lisa by my side. Walking through those glass doors, I felt both terrified and strangely empowered. The same officer who had called me sat down with us in a private room. Lisa placed a neatly organized folder on the table, every document tabbed and highlighted. "This is proof of forgery," Lisa said calmly. "The handwriting analysis, Marion's verified signature samples, and evidence of the false contact information used. This loan was fraudulently obtained by her son-in-law, David Whitman." The officer flipped through the documents, his brows knitting as he realized the depth of the deceit. "This is substantial," he admitted. "We'll escalate this immediately to our fraud department." Hearing those words felt like the first breath of air after being underwater for too long. When we stepped outside, Lisa turned to me. "You need to prepare yourself," she said gently. "David won't stay calm when he realizes he's cornered. Men like him rarely do." I nodded. "I've spent too long being the quiet, trusting mother-in-law. That woman is gone now." That evening, Thomas and David stopped by unannounced. "Hey, Mom," David said warmly, as if nothing had changed. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd bring you dinner. Thomas picked up your favorite pasta." The audacity made my blood boil. But I forced a smile, thanked them, and even poured wine for everyone. As we sat at the table, David talked about his big plans for the future, how he and Thomas might invest in a new property soon, how opportunities were everywhere, if you weren't afraid to take risks. I watched him, every word like poison dripping from his mouth. He was still so confident, so sure that he had me fooled. But soon, very soon, the walls would close in. 2 days later, Lisa called again. "The bank's fraud department has confirmed they'll back our case. We're filing formal charges this week. David will be served with court summons, he won't see it coming." I sat in silence, the reality of it finally settling in. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about betrayal. Deep, personal, unforgivable betrayal. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Thomas. How would he react when the truth came out? Would he stand by David? Or would he finally see the man for who he really was? I dreaded that conversation, but it was one I couldn't avoid forever. The next morning, I decided to visit Thomas at his office alone. When I walked in, he seemed surprised but happy to see me. Mom, this is a nice surprise. I sat across from him, taking a deep breath. Thomas, we need to talk about David. He frowned. What about him? I looked my son in the eyes, my heart aching. David took out a massive loan in my name. He forged my signature, and he's been using the money on another woman. Thomas went pale. That's not possible, he whispered. He couldn't. I slid the folder across his desk. Read it. Every page, every receipt, every transfer. For several long minutes, Thomas flipped through the papers. His hands began to shake. Finally, he set the folder down and buried his face in his hands. God. Mom, what have I done? I reached across the desk and took his hand. You didn't do this, Thomas. But you need to decide who you really married and whether you're willing to let him destroy your family. For the first time, I saw the doubt, the cracks in David's perfect facade finally reaching my son's heart. And I knew the fight was far from over. Because now I wasn't just battling for my future. I was battling for my son's too. Thomas didn't speak for a long time after reading the documents. He sat there, shoulders hunched, face buried in his hands. It was as if the world he had built with David had just come crashing down around him. Mom, I don't know what to say, he whispered at last, his voice breaking. I thought he loved me. I thought we were building a life together. How could I have been so blind? I reached out and gently squeezed his hand. Thomas' love can make us blind. I trusted him too. I let him into my home, my life, my finances. We both believed his lies. Tears welled in his eyes. But why would he do this to you? To us? Because people like David only care about themselves, I said softly. They take and take until there's nothing left. And then they move on to the next person who trusts them. Thomas wiped his face with the back of his hand, his expression hardening. I need to talk to him. I need to hear it from him directly. No, I said firmly. Not yet. If you confront him now, he'll cover his tracks. He'll find a way to twist the story. We have to be smart about this. He looked at me conflicted. So what do? We wait, I said. And when the time comes, we let the truth speak for itself. The next few days felt like a strange charade. David acted as if everything was normal, texting me cheerful messages, stopping by with groceries, even offering to mow my lawn. Each gesture made my stomach turn, but I kept playing the role of the trusting mother-in-law. At night, though, I could see the toll it was taking on Thomas. He had become quieter, withdrawn, his eyes haunted whenever David was near. It was only a matter of time before David sensed that something was off. One evening, the three of us sat together for dinner. David was in his usual form, chatty, confident, a little too smug for his own good. At one point, he looked at Thomas and said, "Babe, I've been thinking, maybe we should take out another loan to invest in that property I mentioned. It's a sure thing. We'll make so much money." Thomas's fork clattered against his plate. "Another loan," he said sharply. David raised an eyebrow. "What? It's just smart business. You know that." Thomas stared at him for a long moment, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, smart business." David grinned, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Later that night, Thomas called me privately. "Mom, I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending," he admitted. "Every time I look at him, I feel sick." "You have to hold on," I urged. "The summons will be served any day now. Once it happens, there's no going back." He let out a shaky breath. I can't believe the man I married is capable of something like this. It's like, I don't even know him." "I know," I said softly. "But sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us in ways we never see coming." 2 days later, Lisa called me with the news we'd been waiting for. "The court has approved the summons," she said. "David will be officially served tomorrow morning." I hung up, my heart pounding. Tomorrow everything would change. David would finally realize that the quiet, trusting mother-in-law he thought he could exploit had been building her case against him all along. And I couldn't wait to see the look on his face when the truth came crashing down. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My hands trembled as I poured myself a cup of coffee, knowing that today was the day everything would shift. Lisa had arranged for a process server to deliver the summons directly to David at home. I wanted so badly to be there when it happened, but Lisa advised against it. Stay calm, stay distant, she told me. Let the law do its work. If you're there, he'll try to twist the situation, play the victim, manipulate Thomas, or even intimidate you. So I waited. At exactly 9:30, my phone rang. It was Lisa. It's done, she said simply. He's been served. I let out a shaky breath. How did he take it? I wasn't there, Lisa replied, but from what I heard, he wasn't smiling anymore. A cold satisfaction settled over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. That afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find David standing there, red-faced and furious. You, he spat, jabbing a finger at me. How dare you do this to me? I met his rage with calm silence. David, you need to leave. You think you can ruin my life? He shouted. I've done everything for this family. Everything. And this is how you repay me. Behind him, Thomas appeared, his expression torn between anger and heartbreak. David, stop, Thomas said sharply. Stop! David turned on him. Your mother is trying to destroy me. You're just going to let her? Thomas's jaw clenched. She's not destroying you, David. You did this to yourself. For a moment, David looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe Thomas wasn't defending him. You're my husband, David shouted, his voice cracking. You're supposed to be on my side. Thomas stepped closer, his voice steady but cold. I married a man I thought I could trust. I stood by you, defended. You loved you. But now I see who you really are, and you disgust me. David's face crumpled, but only for a second before rage overtook him again. This isn't over, he hissed at me. His eyes filled with venom. You're going to regret this, Marion. I stepped forward, my voice low but unwavering. No, David, you're going to regret underestimating me. He stormed off, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. For a moment, the house was silent. Then Thomas sat down at the table, burying his face in his hands. Mom, I don't even know who I married anymore. I reached over and gently touched his shoulder. You married a man who fooled both of us. But now we face the truth, and we'll face it together. Over the next few days, the fallout began. David's perfect image started to crumble. Word spread quickly about the charges filed against him: fraud, forgery, identity theft. Thomas moved out of their shared apartment and into a friend's house. It broke my heart to see my son's world collapse. But I also knew this was the only way forward. Lisa kept me updated as the court date drew closer. David's lawyer is scrambling, she said. They're trying to argue it was all a misunderstanding, that you gave him permission. I laughed bitterly. Permission? To steal from me and fund an affair? Lisa's voice hardened. He doesn't have a leg to stand on. The evidence is overwhelming. We're going to win this, Marion. That night, as I sat alone in my quiet house, I thought about everything that had happened. For years, I had been the kind of woman who avoided conflict, who believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But David had taught me a hard truth. Kindness without boundaries is an invitation for exploitation, and I would never let anyone take advantage of me again. The court date came faster than I expected. Lisa had prepared me for everything: the questions I might be asked, the documents I needed to have ready, and how to keep my composure, no matter what David tried to pull. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a navy blue suit I hadn't worn since my retirement ceremony. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. There was no trace of the naive mother-in-law who once trusted David without question. This was a woman ready to fight. When I arrived at the courthouse, my hands were shaking. Lisa gave me a reassuring nod. You've got this, she said softly. David was already there, sitting beside his lawyer. He looked smaller somehow. His confident posture was gone, replaced by a man frantically whispering to his attorney. But when he saw me, he smirked. It wasn't the charming smile I had once known. It was cold, defiant. The hearing began. The judge looked through the documents as Lisa laid out our case: how David had gained access to my personal information, how he had forged my signature, and how the loan funds had been traced to his account, and another woman named Stephanie Miller. David's lawyer tried to argue that I had given permission, that it had been a family arrangement gone wrong. But Lisa was relentless. Permission doesn't explain forged signatures. Permission doesn't explain falsified contact information, and permission certainly doesn't explain using the money to pay for hotels, jewelry, and dinners with a mistress. The judge's expression hardened as the evidence piled up. When David was finally asked to speak, he launched into a desperate, rambling speech about how I had always treated him like a son, and how this was just a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. I sat there silently watching him twist himself into knots. For years I had fallen for that smooth talk, those convincing lies. But not anymore. At one point, David turned to me, his voice breaking. "Mom, please. You know I'd never hurt you. Tell them this isn't what it looks like." I met his gaze steadily. "This is exactly what it looks like, David." The courtroom went silent. By the end of the day, it was clear the judge had made up his mind. The evidence was overwhelming, and David's lies had finally reached their limit. As we left the courthouse, Lisa gave me a small smile. "It's not official yet, but Marion, we've won." Outside, the sun was bright, almost blinding. For the first time in months, I felt light. Like a weight I'd been carrying had finally started to lift. Thomas walked up beside me, his face pale but resolute. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered. I shook my head gently. "This isn't your fault, but it's time to rebuild. For both of us." That night alone in my house, I sat by the window with a cup of tea staring at the stars. I thought about everything David had taken from me: my trust, my peace of mind, my sense of safety. But he hadn't taken the most important thing: my strength. And soon the world would see just how strong I could be. The days leading up to the final court decision felt strangely quiet. David had gone from arrogant and smug to desperate. He sent messages through Thomas, pleas to talk things out, to settle privately, and worst of all, to forgive him, like family should. Thomas didn't respond to most of them. He was still processing the betrayal. I could see the toll it was taking on him, the sleepless nights, the way he stared at nothing for long stretches of time. One evening, he came to see me. "Mom, I don't know if I can handle the trial," he admitted, his voice breaking. I loved him. I really thought we had a future together. I held his hand gently. "Thomas, it's okay to grieve. You lost the person you thought he was, but the man he really is. That man was willing to destroy both of us for money." Thomas nodded slowly, tears in his eyes. I don't know how to forgive myself for not seeing it sooner." "You don't need to forgive yourself for being kind, Thomas," I said softly. "His deceit is not your burden to carry. It's his." Meanwhile, Lisa kept me updated daily. "David's lawyer is scrambling," she told me. "They've offered to settle if you drop the charges. He's terrified of the prison sentence he's facing." I took a deep breath. No, he needs to face justice. I won't let him buy his way out of accountability. Lisa smiled faintly. "I thought you'd say that. You've got more strength than most people I know." A few nights later, something unexpected happened. David showed up at my house again, this time without warning. I opened the door to see him standing there, his once perfectly groomed appearance now messy, his eyes bloodshot. "Marion, please," he begged, his voice hoarse. "I messed up. I was stupid. But you're destroying my life. We can fix this. We can—" I cut him off with a calm, steady voice. "No, David. You destroyed your own life. I'm just making sure you face the consequences." His eyes hardened. "You think you're winning? You think anyone will thank you for this? Thomas will hate you for turning him against me." I stepped closer, my voice cold but controlled. "Thomas doesn't hate me, David. He hates the man who lied to him, betrayed him, and stole from his own family." For a moment, David's mask cracked. His lips trembled. His eyes darted around like a trapped animal. Then he turned and stormed away, muttering something under his breath I couldn't hear. When I closed the door, my hands were shaking. But I didn't regret a single word. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting back. The next morning, Lisa called again. "The final hearing is set for Friday," she said. "We'll present the last pieces of evidence: bank transfers to the mistress, forged emails, and David's own text messages bragging about how easy it was to get your information." I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was almost over. And when it was, David would finally understand the price of betraying me. Friday arrived with a gray, overcast sky that seemed to mirror the heaviness in my chest. As Lisa and I walked into the courthouse, I felt my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I had prepared for this moment for weeks, but the weight of it still pressed down on me. David was already inside, sitting next to his lawyer. He looked far from the confident man I once knew, his hair unkempt, his suit slightly wrinkled, his usual smugness gone. When his eyes met mine, I saw something new there. Fear. The hearing began. Lisa methodically laid out the remaining evidence: bank statements showing extravagant spending on another woman, the emails David had sent to lenders pretending to be me, and the handwriting expert's report confirming the forgery. Each piece of evidence was like a nail in the coffin of David's defense. When it was his turn to speak, David's voice shook. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said, trying to sound remorseful. I thought I was helping the family. I never meant to hurt anyone." The judge's expression didn't change. "Mr. Whitman, this was not help. This was deliberate fraud." Then the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Aldridge, do you have anything you'd like to say?" I stood slowly, my legs trembling but my voice steady. For years I trusted David. I treated him like a son. And he repaid me by stealing from me, by lying to my face, by betraying the family that welcomed him with open arms. Today isn't just about money. It's about justice for me, for my son, and for every person who has ever been taken advantage of by someone they loved and trusted. When I sat down, I saw David glance at me with something almost like shame, but it was too late for that. The judge announced that the final verdict would be delivered the following week, but it was clear which way the decision was leaning. David looked pale, his hands trembling as he gathered his papers. Lisa leaned toward me and whispered, "He knows he's lost." Outside the courthouse, Thomas waited for me. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so proud of you." I felt my throat tighten. I didn't want to fight this battle, Thomas. But if I didn't, he would have destroyed both of us. Thomas hugged me tightly as if he never wanted to let go. And for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope for our future. That night, I sat at my kitchen table sipping tea and staring at the pile of documents that had once terrified me. Now they felt like something else entirely, proof that I wasn't powerless. David had underestimated me, and soon the world would see just how wrong he had been. The week leading up to the final verdict felt strangely quiet, almost unnerving. For months, my life had been filled with tension, dread, and the constant feeling of waiting for the next blow to fall. Now there was only silence. David didn't try to contact me again after that last outburst at my door. Instead, I heard from Lisa that his lawyer had been frantically trying to negotiate a lighter sentence. But with every piece of evidence we had collected, every forged signature, every bank transfer, every incriminating text, there was no way out for him. Thomas had been staying with me since moving out of their apartment. He looked different now, older, weighed down by heartbreak. Sometimes late at night, I could hear him pacing in the guest room. Once I found him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, staring at nothing. "Can't sleep?" I asked gently. He shook his head. "I keep thinking about the man I thought I married. How could I have loved someone like that?" I sat beside him, my heart aching for my son, because he was good at pretending. People like David make you believe they're everything you've ever wanted. But that doesn't mean you were foolish, Thomas. It means you were kind, and he took advantage of that. Thomas's eyes glistened. I feel so stupid." I reached for his hand. "You're not stupid. You trusted someone you loved. And that says more about your heart than his deceit ever will." Friday arrived, and the courthouse felt colder than ever. The room was packed this time. Reporters had caught wind of the case, fascinated by the story of a son-in-law betraying his elderly mother-in-law. David sat at the defense table, his face pale, his once perfectly combed hair messy and damp with sweat. The confident man I had once known was gone. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. After reviewing all evidence, testimony, and documentation, the judge began. "This court finds David Whitman guilty of forgery, fraud, and identity theft." The words seemed to echo through the room. David closed his eyes, his head dropping as if the weight of reality had finally crushed him. The judge continued, "The loan is hereby voided. Mrs. Marian Aldridge bears no financial responsibility." The defendant is sentenced to 4 years in state prison, with restitution to be paid to the victim. I felt my breath catch a flood of emotions rushing through me: relief, vindication, sadness for the son I had raised, and the pain he had endured. David was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. For the first time, he didn't look at me. He kept his head down, his shoulders slumped, the arrogance stripped away. Outside, the media swarmed us with questions, but Lisa shielded me as much as she could. "No comment," she repeated firmly. "This is a private matter." Thomas stood beside me, his face pale but resolute. As the cameras flashed, he whispered, "It's finally over, Mom." I nodded, feeling the tears I had held back for so long finally spill over. "Yes, it is." That evening, we sat together in my living room, the house quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. "Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" Thomas asked softly. I shook my head slowly. Forgiveness isn't for people who show no remorse. "I don't hate him, Thomas, but I will never forget what he did. And I will never let him hurt us again." Thomas leaned back, his eyes red but determined. "I don't know how to move on from here." "You will," I said gently. "We both will, because we're stronger than what he did to us." Later that night, when Thomas had gone to bed, I sat alone by the window staring at the dark sky outside. This house, my life, my future, they were still mine. David had tried to take everything from me, but he failed. And as I sipped my tea, I realized something powerful. I had spent too long being quiet, being accommodating, believing that kindness would protect me. Never again. Because I had learned the hard way that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is fight back, silently, patiently, until justice is finally served. In the days after the verdict, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. Yet even with David behind bars, I couldn't ignore the gnawing ache that lingered. Thomas had barely spoken since that day in court. He moved through the house like a ghost, polite and helpful but distant. One evening, I found him in the backyard, sitting on the old wooden bench where his father used to read the newspaper. The autumn air was crisp and fallen leaves crunched under my shoes as I approached. "Mind if I join you?" I asked softly. He shook his head, staring at the ground. We sat in silence for a while, the quiet broken only by the rustle of leaves. Finally, Thomas spoke. "I keep wondering how I didn't see it, Mom. How could I have loved someone so selfish? I feel like my whole life has been a lie." I turned to him. "Because you believed in love. Because you wanted to see the good in him. That isn't weakness, Thomas. That's strength. People like David take advantage of that kindness, but that doesn't mean your love wasn't real." Thomas let out a shaky breath. "I don't know if I'll ever trust anyone again." I placed my hand on his. "You will. Not right away and not easily, but one day you will. And when you do, it'll be because you've learned what trust really means." The following week, Lisa came by with the final paperwork. "Everything's settled," she said, handing me a folder. "The bank has officially cleared your name, and David is legally obligated to pay restitution once he's released. But honestly, I doubt he'll ever recover financially after this." I looked at the documents, my fingers tracing over the bold letters. My name cleared. My life restored. It felt surreal. "You fought back," Mary and Lisa said with a small smile. "Most people would have been too afraid. You should be proud." I nodded slowly. "I am. But more than anything, I feel free." A few days later, Thomas and I sat down together to talk about what came next. "Mom, I can't live in the same apartment David and I shared." "Too many memories," he admitted. "Then don't," I said gently. "This is your chance to start fresh. New place, new life. You deserve that." He hesitated. "I'm scared, Mom." "Scared of being alone again?" "You won't be alone," I said firmly. "You have me. We'll rebuild together. And when you're ready, you'll find someone who truly values you." Thomas gave me a small, grateful smile. Life began to slowly fall into a rhythm again. I started volunteering at the local library twice a week, something I'd always loved but never had time for. Being around books, sharing stories with children felt healing in a way I hadn't expected. Thomas found a new apartment not far from my house. It was small, but bright, with big windows that let in the morning sun. The first time I visited, I saw a glimpse of the man he used to be, hopeful, determined, ready to move forward. One evening, as we unpacked his boxes together, Thomas looked at me with quiet gratitude. Mom, thank you. For fighting back, for not letting him win. I don't know where I'd be if you hadn't. I squeezed his hand. We saved each other, Thomas. I fought for my future and yours too. Sometimes late at night, I still thought about David. About the man who had smiled at me like a devoted son while plotting to ruin me. But those thoughts no longer hurt the way they used to, because I had survived. And more than that, I had won. On a crisp Sunday morning, as Thomas and I sat drinking coffee together, he looked at me and said, "You know, Mom, you're the strongest person I know." I laughed softly. I wasn't always. But I learned that strength isn't about shouting the loudest. Sometimes it's about staying quiet, biding your time, and striking when it matters most. He smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. As the sunlight streamed through the window, warming my face, I realized something powerful. David had taken so much from me: my trust, my peace of mind, the sense of safety I once felt in my own family. But he hadn't taken my spirit. I had rebuilt what he tried to destroy. And in that moment, I knew this chapter of my life was finally closing, not with bitterness, but with strength. The months that followed were quieter, but the silence no longer felt suffocating. It felt like freedom. I had grown used to waking up each morning without the constant fear of losing everything. The calls from the bank had stopped. The legal battles were over, and David was no longer a looming shadow in my life. But even with the case behind me, I couldn't ignore the lingering wound in our family. Thomas was still rebuilding, trying to find his footing in a world where the man he'd loved turned out to be a fraud. One Saturday morning, as we shared breakfast, he looked up from his coffee and asked Mom, "Do you think people ever really change?" I thought for a long moment before answering. I think people can change if they want to. But David, men like him rarely do. They think they're too clever to ever be caught. Thomas nodded slowly. I believed everything he said to me. Every promise, every plan. It's hard to imagine ever trusting anyone again. I reached for his hand. You don't have to rush. Healing takes time. But you will love again one day. And when you do, it'll be with someone who truly deserves you. Around that time, the local newspaper reached out to me. They'd heard about the case and wanted to feature my story in an article about elder financial abuse. At first, I hesitated. Talking about what happened meant reliving everything: the betrayal, the shame of being deceived, the humiliation of having to fight for my own identity. But then I thought about all the people like me, people who trusted their loved ones, blindly believing family could never hurt them. I agreed to the interview. Sitting in the reporter's office, I told my story from the beginning. I didn't cry, but my voice trembled as I spoke about the day the bank first called, how it felt to realize someone I loved had stolen from me, and the strength it took to fight back. The reporter listened carefully, jotting down notes. "Why share your story now?" she asked gently. "Because people need to know it can happen to anyone," I said. "Trust is important, but blind trust can be dangerous. If I had questioned David sooner, maybe none of this would have happened. I don't want anyone else to feel as helpless as I did." When the article was published, I received dozens of messages from people who had been through similar experiences. Parents, grandparents, even siblings who had been taken advantage of by those closest to them. Many of them thanked me for speaking out. For the first time, I felt like something good had come out of all the pain. One evening, Thomas came over with a small smile on his face. "Mom, I met someone." My heart swelled. "Oh," he nodded. "It's nothing serious yet, but she's kind. And she knows about what happened. She doesn't judge me for it." I could see the glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That's wonderful, Thomas," I said softly. "You deserve someone who values you for who you are, not what you have." The holidays that year were different, smaller, quieter, but they felt peaceful. I decorated the house with Thomas just like we used to when he was a boy. We laughed over old ornaments, shared stories about my late husband, and even baked the cookies we used to make as a family. For the first time in a long while, I felt like my home was mine again. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks lit up the night sky, Thomas raised a glass of sparkling cider. To new beginnings, he said. I clinked my glass against his. To strength and to never underestimating the quiet ones. Later that night, as I sat by the window watching the last of the fireworks fade, I thought about David. He had taken so much from me, my trust, my peace, my sense of security. But in the end, he had given me something too. He had reminded me that I was stronger than I ever knew. And that quiet strength, the kind that doesn't shout but endures, was what ultimately saved me. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. With the court case behind me, I found myself rediscovering parts of my life that I had neglected for years. I began volunteering at the library more often, helping children with reading programs and leading a small book club for seniors. Every time I saw someone's face light up as they connected with a story, I felt a quiet joy that had been missing for far too long. Thomas, too, was starting to heal. He spoke more often about the woman he'd met, Claire. She was kind, patient, and most importantly, completely open about her life. One Sunday afternoon, Thomas brought her over for dinner. "Mom, this is Claire," he said, a nervous smile on his face. Claire extended her hand. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Aldridge. Thomas talks about you all the time." "Please call me Marian," I said warmly. As we sat down to eat, I found myself studying her carefully. There was something sincere in her eyes, a gentleness that immediately put me at ease. After dinner, as Thomas and Claire were leaving, Claire turned to me and said quietly, "Thomas is a wonderful man. I promise I'll never take that for granted." Her words made my chest tighten with gratitude. Not long after, I received a letter from the state correctional facility. It was from David. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single-page letter written in neat handwriting. "Marian, I don't expect you to forgive me. I know I destroyed everything, and I'll never get back what I lost. I'm sorry, not because I got caught, but because I finally see the pain I caused. I hope one day you can find peace, even if it's without me in your life." I set the letter down, my emotions conflicted. Was it genuine remorse? Or just another manipulation? I decided it didn't matter. David's words, whatever they truly meant, had no power over me anymore. Months passed, and life slowly became lighter. Thomas and Claire grew closer, and soon he told me he was thinking of proposing. "Are you sure you're ready?" I asked gently. He smiled softly. "Yes, this feels different. She's honest, Mom. I can see it in everything she does." Seeing hope return to my son's eyes made me realize something profound. Betrayal doesn't have to define you. It hurts, it scars, but it can also teach you to value the people who truly deserve your trust. One afternoon, I sat on my porch, the warm sun on my face as I watched children play down the street. I thought about how much had changed in just a year. I had gone from being a quiet, trusting woman who believed family could do no wrong to someone who understood that strength doesn't always look like shouting or fighting. Sometimes strength is patience. It's gathering evidence while pretending to smile. It's striking when the time is right, without rage, without vengeance, just certainty. That evening, Thomas stopped by with Claire. He handed me a small box. "Open it, Mom," he said, grinning. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Quiet but unbreakable." Tears welled in my eyes. "It's perfect," I whispered. Thomas hugged me tightly. "Because that's who you are. You saved yourself and me. I'll never forget that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized that David had taken a lot from me. But he hadn't taken my resilience. He hadn't taken my ability to rebuild. And in the end, my quiet strength had been louder than all his lies. Spring arrived, and with it came a sense of renewal I hadn't felt in years. My garden, which I had neglected during the long months of court battles and emotional upheaval, began to bloom again. Each morning, I spent time tending to the flowers, their colors a reminder that life continues to grow even after the harshest winters. Thomas seemed happier too. He and Claire had become inseparable, and he often stopped by to share stories of their time together. Simple things like cooking dinner or taking walks in the park. These ordinary moments, I realized, were the very things David had stolen from him. Peace, trust, and the freedom to love without fear. One afternoon, Thomas and Claire came over with big smiles on their faces. Mom, Thomas said nervously, "We have news. We're engaged." I felt tears welling in my eyes. "Oh, Thomas, I'm so happy for you both." Claire reached for my hand. "I promise you, Marion, I will always take care of him, and I will never, ever take for granted what trust means." Her sincerity warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time, I felt like my son had found someone who truly understood him and respected the values I had raised him with. A few weeks later, I received another letter from David. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Marion, this will be my last letter to you. I've had a lot of time to think. I know I've ruined everything. I can't undo what I've done, but I hope you'll find peace. If you ever can tell Thomas, I loved him in my own broken way." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer without replying. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed him. And even if he truly felt remorse, it didn't erase the pain he caused. As Thomas and Claire began planning their wedding, I found myself more involved than I had expected. Claire often came by to discuss venues, colors, and flowers. She always asked for my opinion, which made me feel deeply valued. One evening, while we were flipping through a photo album, Claire paused at an old picture of Thomas as a child, sitting on my late husband's shoulders. "You've been through so much," she said softly. "But you raised a man who knows how to love deeply. That's because of you." Her words brought tears to my eyes. The wedding day came in late summer, warm and bright. As I watched Thomas and Claire exchange vows, I felt a swell of pride, not just for my son, but for myself. I had survived betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak. And yet I stood here today stronger than I had ever been. When Thomas and Claire shared their first dance, I couldn't help but think back to the dark days when I believed David had taken everything from us. But he hadn't. We had rebuilt. And in many ways, our bond was now stronger than ever. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on everything I had been through. David's betrayal had taught me painful lessons, but it had also shown me my own strength, the kind that doesn't roar but endures, that quietly gathers power until the moment to act finally arrives. I realized that my life was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I had fought to protect. And as sleep began to overtake me, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would never again underestimate the power of quiet resilience. Autumn returned the leaves, turning brilliant shades of red and gold. My house felt warmer than it had in years, filled with laughter and the quiet comfort of a life rebuilt. Thomas and Claire visited often, sometimes bringing dinner or just stopping by for coffee. Seeing my son smile again, truly smile, was the greatest gift I could have asked for. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Thomas turned to me. "Mom, I've been thinking, after everything we went through, I don't want that time to define us. I want to make new memories, ones that aren't tied to him." I nodded, my heart swelling with pride. "That's exactly what we'll do. We've spent enough time letting David take up space in our lives. He doesn't get to control our happiness anymore." That weekend, we held a small family gathering at my house. Claire's parents came along with some of Thomas's old friends. There was laughter, music, and the kind of easy joy I hadn't felt in so long. At one point, as I carried a tray of drinks to the table, Claire's mother stopped me. "You've raised a wonderful son," she said warmly. "He's strong, kind, and thoughtful." "That comes from you." Her words brought a lump to my throat. "Thank you," I replied softly. "It hasn't been an easy road, but we found our way through." Later that night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my living room, the house still humming with the echoes of laughter. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, trusting, quiet, believing that family could do no wrong. And I thought about the woman I had become, still quiet, still kind, but no longer naive. I had faced betrayal head-on. I had fought back. And I had won. Before heading to bed, I opened the drawer where David's letters were stored. For a moment, I considered throwing them away. But then I realized something. Those letters weren't a source of pain anymore. They were reminders. Reminders that even when everything seems lost, strength can come from the unlikeliest places. That night, I wrote my own letter, not to David, but to myself. "Dear Marion, You survived. You fought when it mattered and you never let him win. You found the strength you didn't know you had, and because of that, you and Thomas have a future free of his shadow. You are not defined by what happened to you, but by how you rose above it. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as David's. But this time, it didn't feel like a drawer of pain. It felt like a drawer of closure. Months later, as I stood in my garden surrounded by blooming flowers, Claire came to sit with me. "You know," she said, smiling gently, "Thomas always says you're the strongest person he knows." I laughed softly. "I don't feel strong. Not all the time. That's the thing about real strength," she said. "It doesn't always feel like power. Sometimes it just feels like surviving until you can breathe again." Her words stayed with me. When Thomas and Claire eventually moved into a new home, I helped them unpack. We laughed as we found old photographs, and for the first time, the memories of the past didn't sting the way they used to. David had taken so much from us: trust, time, and the illusion of security. But he hadn't taken the most important thing. We still had each other. And as I stood in their new home watching my son build a future free of lies, I realized that was the greatest victory of all. At the end of that day, as the sun dipped low and cast a golden glow across the room, Thomas hugged me tightly. "Mom," he said softly, "you're my hero. You showed me what real strength looks like. I'll never forget that." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from pride. Because in the end, I had won not through anger or revenge, but through quiet, unshakable resilience. And that was the kind of victory David could never take away.